So, and welcome everyone to our volunteer monitoring training orientation. I'm Ann Lewis. I'm the Special Projects Director in the South Dakota Discovery Center. And we have Jesse Wilkins and Jordan Fosbett. Did I pronounce that right, Jordan?
Yep.
Of the South Dakota Department of Agriculture and Natural Resources to orient us to the program and what it's all about and how it works. So with that, we'll just jump right in and let you take it away.
All right, Jordan's going to take over the screen here and get our slides up.
Oh, Jesse, I'm sorry. If you would like me to activate the hearing, the captions, let me know and I can do that.
I don't know. What's the kind of standard procedure for that?
I can do it on my end. So.
Oh, okay. Well, anyway, I'm Jesse Wilkins. I'm an environmental scientist with South Dakota DANR. I'm the volunteer monitoring coordinator. I am also the lake assessment coordinator for the state. So I wear a couple of different hats. Jordan?
I'm Jordan Fosbett. I'm also an environmental scientist for the Watershed Protection Program. And I'm just here to help out.
We're both out in the Rapid City office, so if you ever need anything from us, we're available there, or else we can we have other offices around the state to help you out with anything that we can. Go to the first slide. So we're just going to jump right into what this program is all about. And really the focus and the values of this program are high quality data. So we're looking to collect data that is professional level quality. So we set the same standards for volunteers that we have for ourselves. So we want your data to be used for the same things that our data is and have the same kind of power and usefulness. So we really focus on quality, and we also look for unbiased data. Slide, please. And what we mean by unbiased data is that we're not targeting certain conditions. We're sampling on a routine frequency, what we refer to as ambient data, routine ambient data. So we're not sampling when it rains. We're not sampling when there's a drought. We're sampling like the second Tuesday of every month or something like that to keep it consistent and so that we're not biasing things. We don't target businesses or facilities. So we don't sample when the wastewater plant is discharging, and we specifically, and we also don't sample when the wastewater facility isn't discharging. And I mean, like, we don't target those conditions. We just sample routinely so that we cover all conditions and we create a fair representation of the water body. We also like to collect data at long-term locations if possible. So we have a lot of sampling locations around the state. You don't have to use those same locations. We're interested in you sampling any water body that you want to. But if we can add to a long-term record of data, that is wonderful for us, because the further back in time and into the future that we have data, the more that we understand about a water body. And we want our data, in most cases, there's an exception that I'll talk about, but we want our data to represent the whole water body, if possible. Slide, please. So what's the data get used for? And of course, you'll have your own reasons for sampling. Maybe you want to know if it's safe to swim at the local beach, or if you're concerned about the stream where your dog plays in the water, or whatever your reasons are. Those are important to us too. What we use the data for that you collect, and same as the data that we collect, is to assess waters under the Clean Water Act to see if they're meeting their water quality standards. If they are meeting their water quality standards, we say they're unimpaired. If they're not meeting their water quality standards, we say that they're impaired. Every 2 years, we report these assessments in a document called the Integrated Report for Surface Water Quality. in South Dakota. And that document lays out all the assessments and tells you whether or not your water body that you're interested in is impaired or not. There's a link there that probably doesn't do you much good unless you can write really fast. But you can find that on the DANR website. If you just Google Integrated Report South Dakota, you'll also find it. We just released a new edition here this month. So that's the 2-year report. It's kind of dry reading. If you ever dig into it and you have questions, go ahead and hit me up and ask me, and I'll answer them the best I can. And if I don't know the answer, I'll find the answer for you. Slide, please. So to do these assessments that are required under the Clean Water Act, we need to have data to know if the lakes are meeting their water quality standards or the streams. So we have minimum data requirements. And these requirements for lakes, we have to sample that lake in 2 years out of the last 10 years. And in those 2 years that we sample it, we have to have 2 samples in that year. If 10% or more of those samples exceed the water quality standard, it's considered impaired. For rivers and streams, it's a little different. We need 20 samples collected over the course of 5 years on separate days. And same as the lakes, if greater than 10% of those samples exceed the standard, is considered impaired. But these are the bare minimum data requirements. I mean, 20 samples on a river or stream isn't bad, but it still only represents a small proportion of the days that exist on that stream over the last 5 years. And for a lake, 2 years out of 10 and only 2 samples in those 2 years isn't much. It's a very minimal amount of data to make a judgment on the water body. So while these are the bare minimum, we really like to exceed those if we can, and your data helps with that a ton. Oh, and you guys, you can interrupt me with any questions that you have. I'll take a couple short breaks for people to ask questions as we go here too. I'm going to jump right into the 4 different types of sampling that we encourage the volunteers to do. The first is lake shoreline sampling. This is real simple stuff where you walk out on a dock or you wade out into the water where it's knee deep or so and you fill some bottles. We sample typically for 2 things on our lake shoreline sampling. The first that's listed there is microcystin. This is a toxin that's produced by blue-green algae. There are other toxins that are produced by blue-green algae, but this is the most common one in South Dakota. We care about this because it can kill pets, wildlife, and livestock and make people fairly ill. And in that picture on the left there, that's a blue-green algae bloom at Lake Madison. If it looks like that, you probably don't want to get in the water because it's very likely that there are high amounts of microcystin or other toxins present. In most cases, we found that if you find microcystin there, that's going to be the most common toxin that we have. So that's the one that we focus on. There's also a good lab test for it that doesn't cost too much money. The other thing that we sample for is E. coli, and this is a fecal bacteria indicator. While E. coli itself can make you sick, we also use it to let us know if there's other fecal matter getting into the water and other fecal bacteria that could be even potentially nastier than E. coli. So, and that can come from leaky septic tanks, livestock, lots of different sources. The main thing is if we want to know if it's there. If we don't know it's there, we can't fix the problem. And you can't see it in the water. It's not like an algae bloom where the water is bright green or something and you're like, yeah, that doesn't look right. With E. coli, it could be there and you'd have no idea. So that's lake shoreline sampling. The other kind of lake sampling that we do is mid-lake sampling, where we go out to a spot in the middle of the lake, right about in the center of the lake or in a reservoir. It would be more towards the deepest part of the reservoir. And we fill up some bottles there, and we also do a Secchi disc measurement. And if you're not familiar with the Secchi disc, in the bottom picture, that's Josh there holding a Secchi disc. And it's a black and white disc that you lower down into the water. And it's used to measure the water clarity. So you lower it down until you can't see it anymore. And then you raise it up a little bit, and that is your Secchi disc depth. So that tells us if the water is cloudy from algae or sediment. And that's really cheap data to collect because you don't have to pay a lab to analyze it. We also collect samples out in the middle of the lake. And what we're really focusing on with these samples are nutrients and algae, how much algae. And algae needs nutrients to grow and thrive and produce those high numbers that make it concerning. So out in the middle of the lake, we sample for total phosphorus. And this all comes for the nutrients. It's all one bottle. They analyze phosphorus and the 3 different kinds of nitrogen out of one bottle. But we do total phosphorus, and then these 3 kinds of nitrogen. Nitrogen can be in several forms. So we want to cover all the forms that it can be in so that we can quantify how much nitrogen is there and understand what form its proportions are in. So total Keldal nitrogen, Keldal was, I think, the name of a scientist who came up with this method of looking at nitrogen. And that gives us an idea generally of how much organic nitrogen is in the water. And that's going to be nitrogen that's bound up in life forms like algae or zooplankton and things like that. We also look at ammonia, which you're probably familiar with as a cleaning product. And then also nitrate/nitrite. And we group nitrate and nitrite together because they can switch forms back and forth so rapidly that we just kind of throw them in together and count them as one. Then the other bottle that we fill out in the middle of the lake is the chlorophyll A bottle. And algae has chlorophyll in it. So by determining how much chlorophyll is in the water, we can use that as an estimate of how much algae is in the water. So pairing up these different things, the nitrogen, phosphorus, and chlorophyll, gives us a really good look at how productive the lake is, like how well does it grow algae and other things. One note on the phosphorus and nitrogen bottle, you do have to add a little tiny bit of sulfuric acid into that. We would supply that for you. It is concentrated, so you need to be very careful with it. It does hurt if you get it on your skin. I know that from experience. But we'll set you up with that, and we'll give you the gear that you need. We used to do composite sampling. If you're an experienced sampler with our program, we're going to start phasing out the composite sampling to simplify things for groups. That would be where you go to 3 spots in the lake and you get a little water from each one, and then you mix it up and fill your bottles. We're not going to do that anymore. If you have that in your sampling plan, you can finish out the last year of your sampling plan. But in your next sampling plan, we'll move to just the grab sample. That's where you just dunk a bottle in the water and fill it up, and that's that. Next slide, please. And then we do stream sampling, which is, obviously a very common type of sampling. That's me there collecting a sample. This is pretty straightforward. Often the hardest thing is just getting into the water or accessing the water. As you can see, I'm facing upstream into the current there so that my boots aren't mucking up the bottom and getting that in my bottle, because we don't want to bias or contaminate our sample in any way. And for stream sampling, we're looking at 2 parameters. And I should know what a parameter is. We consider a parameter like a thing that we test the water for. So in this case, E. coli and total suspended solids. We talked about E. coli, it's a fecal indicator. Total suspended solids is it's a way to measure the amount of sediment in the water. And it focuses on sediment that suspends in the water rather than, say, like particles of sand that would sink to the bottom. So this is the sediment that makes your water cloudy and murky. Next slide, please. Does anybody have any questions about those water sampling techniques before we move on to the benthic macroinvertebrates?
Since we're a small group, if you'd like to unmute instead of putting it in the chat, it's a little easier to do that.
Doesn't sound like anything. Okay.
In some water sampling that I've done in the past, I needed to ensure that there was minimal headspace in the water collection facility, and to ship that basically in dry ice to ensure that chlorine levels didn't change in between. So
Sure.
Are you concerned with that?
No, so that's not going to be a real worry that we have. In some places, we worry about chlorine impacting our E. coli concentrations because the chlorine can kill your E. coli while it sits in the bottle. We have ways to neutralize that chlorine. And if that's a concern, your sample bottles for that place will have some sodium thiosulfate in them, which neutralizes that chlorine. None of our bottles do we fill to the very top. Our standard operating procedures have us fill, I'm pretty sure, just about all of our bottles up to the shoulder of the bottle. We don't freeze any samples either. We did freeze some microcystin samples in the past, but we're not going to be doing that anymore. So no, you shouldn't have to worry about that. And you don't have to worry about dry ice. All of our samples will be shipped on wet ice. That answer your question? Okay, well, we'll talk about benthic macroinvertebrate sampling. Nobody's actually done this yet as a volunteer. If somebody wants to, that would be great. Benthic macroinvertebrates are the aquatic life stages of bugs. And they typically live on the bottom of the stream bed or in a lake if it's a lake, but we typically do the sampling in streams. And these bugs, I just call it bug sampling because it's easier to say than saying benthic macroinvertebrates every time. These are really great indicators of water quality because some bugs are more sensitive than others. And bugs are exposed to the water all the time. Not like when you collect a water sample, that's like a snapshot in time. But a bug is exposed to the water for its entire life. So your sensitive bugs, we can use them as an indicator. If they're there, it means that the habitat and the water quality haven't killed them. So it means that we must have pretty good water quality and habitat conditions. If all the sensitive bugs are gone and you're left only with bugs that are really tolerant, that's an indicator that, hey, something is killing off these bugs. And even if we didn't catch it with our water samples, we know that something is impacting them. So there's a lot of value to this data for us. A lot of people, they think they would like to ID their bugs themselves, but none of us are qualified to do that. So what we do is we go and we draw like 11 imaginary lines across the stream channel, and those are called transects. And at those locations, we collect some bugs. You can see Paul there on the left. He's got his D net to collect macroinvertebrates, and he's got his sieve bucket sitting in the water behind him. And he's in a stream in the Black Hills, and where you have some current like that, you just take your boot and you agitate the bottom and like about a 1 square foot area, and you let the bugs float up and drift into your net, and then you put them in your sieve bucket and you go to the next transect and you do it again, and you do all 11 transects, and then you put them into some sample bottles and you top those off with ethanol to kill and preserve the bugs. And then we send those bottles off to a lab. Where they have trained and highly skilled entomologists that pick every single bug out of that sample and ID it. And so you're totally more than welcome to pick through a few of the bugs yourself if you want and try to figure them out. But we try to send those off to the experts and let them send us back the results. Any questions about benthic macroinvertebrate sampling? Nope. Okay. Next slide.
I
please,
guess.
Drew. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
How often do you take samples for that?
This would probably be more like a once a year kind of thing.
Oh, okay.
You could do it more if you wanted. But seeing as nobody as a volunteer has done it yet, we don't really have any guidelines or framework there yet. So yeah, it would kind of be up to how much you wanted to do it. So there's a lot of flexibility there on the bug sampling.
Okay.
Do you have any bodies of water that you're particularly trying to do this on?
Yeah, that's a great question. We do have ones because we have a thing in our water quality standards where in streams in the prairie, so the eastern and western prairie portions of the state, without getting too far into the weeds here, if we look at, so a lot of them have high nutrient concentrations. And we don't know for sure if those are impacting the aquatic life, so the fish and the invertebrates that live in the stream there. But we know that the nutrients are high. So we try to verify or find out if the nutrients are impacting those fish and macroinvertebrates. So we have a subset of streams in the state where we're looking to collect bug data like this so that we can see what the communities are like. Because if the communities aren't in good health, we will list those streams as impaired. If they're in good health, it would be apparent that the nutrients aren't affecting them too much. So yeah, there are some streams where we would like data more than others, but we would take it anywhere you're interested in doing it, as long as it's a stream and it has water in it. So anything else?
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Next slide, please.
There we go. Okay.
Oh.
So Jesse mentioned that the two of the main goals of the volunteer monitoring program are high quality and unbiased data. And this is the document that lays out some of the rules to follow to achieve that. It's called the Quality Assurance Project Plan, or QAPP to shorten it up. So one of the things outlined in that is that 20% of your total number of samples needs to be quality assurance and quality control samples, so QAQC. We'll explain what that is in the next slide. It also says that you need to attend a training if it is your first year sampling, and that training this year is May 14th in Pier. It also outlines the need for a quality assurance report every other year. So we just wrote ours last September, so there'll be another one 2 years. You don't need to worry about that. We'll do that for you and then send you the results of that. And that just outlines how well you did on achieving the QAQC sampling, the 20%. It also says that you need to use EPA approved lab methods. You don't have to worry about the lab methods. We have these 3 labs that we use that you're all set up to send your samples to, the South Dakota Health Lab, Midwest Labs, and Mid-Continent Labs. Those are all EPA approved labs. Also says that you need to use South Dakota Danner standard operating procedures for volunteer monitors. That's just a document that outlines step-by-step each kind of sampling. So you can reference that whenever you want. It's part of the QAPP that you are required to have that document with you whenever you go sampling, so you have it available.
Quick note, it's also available on our website. So if you just have your phone with you in cell service, you'll always have it with you.
Yep. And then the last part of the QAPP is that you need to develop a sampling plan and then stick to that plan for the data to be high quality. So now we have the quality assurance, quality control sampling. So that needs to be 20% of your total number of samples. 10% of those, half of it, is replicate samples, and that's just an identical sample. So when you're dunking one bottle, you do another one right at the same time at the same location. This is to test the lab's precision, so the results should be pretty similar within a close range of each other. And then the other type of QAQC sample is a blank sample. That has to be the other 10% of the QAQC samples. That's just a bottle filled with distilled or deionized water. You don't have to do anything else with it. Send it in with the rest of them. And this is to test the sampler's technique. The lab shouldn't detect anything in there other than just plain water. So the blanks make sure that there's no contamination during sampling or during the lab analysis. And if you already have a sampling plan from last year, you might notice that we increased from 10% of the QAQC to 20%, and that matches the standards we hold ourselves to. So that just makes your data even more high quality. If you want to finish out your sampling plan at the 10%, you can do that. But from now on, everything is going to be 20% QAQC.
It really won't affect how many you have to take, because in most cases, most volunteers aren't collecting that many samples where it really changes a whole lot.
Yeah, and everyone did really well with it last year based on the QAQC reports that we had to put together. So the sampling plan, you can work with us to create that. So just give us a call or send us an email and let us know where you'd like to sample, when, if it's a lake or a stream, and then how you'd like to accomplish that. We'll review the sampling plan for bias and data quality. And then again, that's a 2-year plan. We like 2-year plans because that makes it easier for us and then easier for you. You have something set in stone for 2 years. Then, as mentioned before, there's the field training. You need to attend that if this is your first year of sampling. That'll be Saturday, May 14th, 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. in Griffin Park in Pier. And that's just right on the river in town. All types of sampling that Jesse talked about will be covered at that training, and it'll be hands-on, so you'll have an opportunity to try it all out for yourself.
And a quick note, if you can't make it to that, let us know if this is something you're interested in doing, and we'll try to find a way to get you trained somewhere else that works for you. We have staff in Vermilion, Pierre, Rapid City, and staff that are often traveling, and we can try to work something out if you can't make it to the training. We'd prefer that you made it to the training, but if you absolutely can't make it, we'll figure it out.
There's lots of resources available if you're looking for more information on this program. The main one is the volunteer webpage. Like Jesse mentioned, up on that right side over here that has the standard operating procedures, the quality assurance project plan, an example of what that QA/QC report would look like. We also have training videos that we filmed and put up on our YouTube channel. So the ones for the types of sampling you do are there on that web page as well. You can see on the bottom, we also put down the important dates. So the orientation and training will be listed there when we have those set up and available. There's also a story map on the other side there, and that just goes into more detail on what groups do volunteer monitoring, where they sample, and some of the pictures from training and their activities. A lot of this information is also available on the Discovery Center webpage, specifically the Citizen Science page on there. There's our little blurb that has a link to the story map and the training and that kind of stuff. And, is there anything else you'd want to add on the Discovery Center, Anne?
No, I will update the 2020 training slides with this presentation. And yeah, no, and I'll put a link to the volunteer activities page also.
Okay, cool. Then the main web page we have is WQMAP, the Water Quality Monitoring Access Portal. So this is where you can find most of your data and most of the data we collect through all of our sampling. Each of those yellow dots on that map is a location where we've collected a sample and there's data available on that water body. So you can find your results there after a little bit of lag time. So after you send your samples in, the lab has to process them, then they send us the results, and then before we can put it on the public web page, we have to review and approve the results, and that's just to make sure that there wasn't any typos or anything that's completely out of the ordinary that might have been a mistake. So if you want to go to WQMAP and check out any of the water bodies you'd be interested in sampling and see what kind of data is out there right now, I'd encourage you to do that. If none of it makes sense, that's okay. We have a presentation in the fall where we kind of go into more how to interpret all of your results. We can also schedule individual meetings to go over your results once you're done sampling, or you can call or email us at any time too. There's also the South Dakota Harmful Algal Blooms map, or HABS map to shorten it. That's also a public website. So that has all of the microcystin and algal toxin data. And it also has all the HABS notifications. That'll be a little red flag marker in the middle of the lake. HABS notification is what we call when when there's a microcystin result that exceeds the standards of 8 micrograms per liter. At that level, there's a possibility of negative health effects with the microcystin. So we put a notification out just to let people know that there was that result there. And then Jesse's going to go into some of the things you need to do before you can start sampling.
Sure. And so we talked about the sampling plan. Like I think that I mentioned, we could get this done quite quickly if you just give us a call or send us an email. What we mostly need to know is what water bodies you're interested in sampling, and how frequently you'd be able to sample those, or how much you want to. And we need to get that set up because we need to set up your stations. Those are those yellow dots all over the map, and I'll talk about those some more. And then one other thing that we would need is, if you want to do this, you need to, that quality assurance project plan is on our webpage. There's a signature page on it. We just need the signature page from everybody who's going to sample signed and in our records. It's like an agreement that you're going to do it according to the quality assurance project plan. And so we just put those in a file, and I think we send them off to EPA at some point. I'm not really sure, but it's just good to have. It's kind of, like I said, an agreement that we're all going to do everything according to the plan. Next slide, please. Like the stations, those are those yellow dots. They're the locations for collecting data. A site is also kind of an interchangeable term. We have to set all these up in our database before you start sampling, or else your data won't show up on WQMap. And we use a SQL database to house all of our stations and all of our data. So yeah, before you do anything and submit samples to a lab, we want to have that all set up so that the data knows where it needs to go. Next slide, please. And so some examples of stations. Each station has a station ID. That's like the name for the station or a unique code that signifies that station. These are the stations for the Lake Ponset Association. This is a picture right out of the Standard Operating Procedures Manual. And you notice they all start with LPA, that's for Lake Ponset Association. If you're a master naturalist, all your stations will start with MN. And we do this so that it's easier for you to find your stations and your data when you're browsing WQMap and trying to find your data. That way you don't get it confused with our data or somebody else's data, and you can find yours. The station out in the middle of the lake, LPA 3215, that's the mid-lake sampling station where you go out in your boat or your kayak or whatever, and you'd fill up your bottles there. The 3215 part is the 4-digit code that indicates Lake Ponset. Every lake in the state has been assigned a 4-digit code, and we use those in your station IDs so that we know what lake it is, instead of writing out, say, LPA Lake Ponset, you know, because that gets pretty long. You'll notice the 4 stations around the lake, LPA 3215 A through D, those are the lake shoreline stations where we would collect E. coli and microcystin. And there's more that we can have as many of those on a lake as we want. So basically as many locations as you're willing to visit, we can set those up for you. And one thing that I meant to note earlier is our lake shoreline stations. Those don't really represent the whole lake. They represent that spot on the shoreline, and we're sampling there for human health and other wildlife health concerns. So those, what I talked about, you want your samples to be representative of the whole water body. The exception to that is our lake shoreline samples, where we're really concerned more about human and animal health and safety. I think that's it on this slide. So another thing we need to get set up for you before you sample is we need to get you your data sheets and labels. On the left there is our data sheets, or also called a chain of custody form. That one's totally blank, but what we do is we pre-fill most of the fields on your data sheet. So in most cases, you really only need to put the date, time, and your initials on the sheet. If you did a Secchi disc measurement, you'd write that on there. If it was a replicate or a blank sample, you could check that box as well, but that's all you really need to do with that. And then you can sign it at the bottom if you want, but it's not required. We put labels on our sample bottles so that the lab knows which sample is which and from which water body it came from. Those all have the station ID on them and some other information. Again, you're only going to really need to put the date, time, and your initials on the label. A note is that the labels in most cases are made with waterproof label paper, which will not smudge or peel off if your bottle's in a cooler full of ice and water. The exception to that are the Midwest Labs Microcystin labels. And we can get around those labels smudging or coming off by either taping over the label with clear packing tape, or you just put all your sample bottles in a bag and seal it up and then put the ice around that bag. But we will print these out and mail them to you. So as soon as we have your sampling plan ready and we know what stations you'll be sampling and how often you'll sample them, we'll send you enough data sheets and labels to do your next 2 years of sampling. Next slide, please.
So now we'll cover some more information about the EPA approved labs that we use. So first there's the main lab, the South Dakota State Health Lab in Pierre. They provide the analysis for most of the standard parameters. So that would be the nutrients like nitrogen, phosphorus, all the E. coli, the total suspended solids. And then you also ship your chlorophyll A samples to them. The chlorophyll A samples are actually picked up by a scientist in Pierre, and then those are analyzed by us in our lab. The health lab will ship all of your coolers and bottles directly to you if you want to call them at that phone number at the bottom, or there's also this web form available through that link. All you need to do is fill in your shipping information, how many bottles you need, and they'll send those to you before you ever start sampling. Then another convenient thing that the health lab has is their courier service. So this is completely free through them. They'll pick up your samples nearly anywhere in the state. There's also a list of routine pickup locations and the standard operating procedures for volunteers. You can also call them at the beginning of the day prior to sampling to schedule pickup at any location. You just need to set that up before you go sample. They'll also ship your cooler back to you full of empty bottles automatically. With shipping your cooler, it's important to ship the same day. There's a 24-hour holding time for E. coli, and what that means is that the E. coli sample must be processed in that 24 hours. Otherwise, the cells begin to die and it's not a viable sample anymore. It's not a correct result. The lab also checks the temperature when the cooler is received by them. So you need to make sure that there's enough ice in the cooler so your samples will stay cold throughout the shipping time. We also use mid-continent labs, and that's just in Rapid City, South Dakota. So that's just for people sampling in the Rapid City area. They cover the same standard parameters that the health lab covers. The convenient thing about mid-continent is that you can show up in person Monday, Friday, 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. and pick up all your bottles in a cooler and then drop it off the same day. They also provide your sulfuric acid in nice little vials for you. They also have an after hours drop off available if you can't make it there by 5 p.m. It's just a little box outside their front door. Again, with that, you need to make sure that there's enough ice in the cooler that your samples will stay cold overnight, and then they'll go out in the morning and get the cooler. Then we also use Midwest Laboratories for our microcystin analysis. They're in Omaha, Nebraska. We'll have all of your bottles shipped to you at the beginning of each month for sampling, so you'll have all of the bottles you need for each station. They send all of the materials you need in a cooler, so they have their own labels that are in that little bag, as well as the shipping label for when you're done and all your bottles are filled. So once you're done with your sampling for the month, put everything back in the cooler, put the label on it and call that phone number and they'll pick everything up for you. It's a prepaid label, so you don't have to worry about that as well. So then one last time, the to-do list before sampling. Talk to one of us to put together a sampling plan. You'll need to have the signed quality assurance project plan as well. Again, the training, if it's your first year, that's required to attend. That's in Pierre in May on the 14th. And then we'll need to arrange all of your bottles and supplies to get those to you. We can bring your supplies to training, or we can mail most of them. The one thing we can't mail is the sulfuric acid because it's a hazard. So we'll need to arrange to get that to you in person. But like Jesse said, we have staff all across the state to get that to you if you can't make it to training or we can't exchange that in person.
We can figure something out.
Yeah, we'll figure it out. It's been done. We hope to see you for training, and then here's all of our contact information if you'd like to ask any questions or set up a sampling plan.
I think that's about all we got. If you guys are curious about the standard operating procedures, I don't know if you can see me. It's just a short little book that outlines those, how you would collect a sample. So that's available online. I will bring copies for everybody at the training as well. I see we got a question from Cheryl. It asks, do we need to have the sampling plan in place before the field training? No, you don't. You just need to have it in place before you start doing your actual sampling. So yeah, if you're not even sure if you want to do this or not, but you want to go to the training before you decide or something, yeah, that's totally fine. It would make sense to put the effort into making the plan until you're sure it's something you want to do anyway. So yeah, that's totally fine.
Jesse, I have a question.
Sure.
I noticed in the SOP that the cooler is going to Pierre. Our loose ice, packed with loose ice, that's a change. Before we had to always have it in plastic bags.
No, the SOP always said loose ice. The health lab disagrees with me on that sometimes, and then they want you to bag it because they don't like to deal with the wet bottles. But the best method for water quality sample viability is to put it in loose ice in the cooler. So I'm gonna politely disagree with them on that one, because the more ice that you have in contact with your bottle, the cooler it gets. So they might call you and say, hey, please don't do that. If they do that, just let me know and I'll give them a call and we'll figure it out.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Chuck has a question, how to set up a plan, send proposal to Jesse. Yeah, you could do that. That would be totally fine. However you want to do it, you can give me a call, you can send an email, you can send me a proposal. It could be as simple as, I want to sample Fire Steel Creek. Then I will help you try to figure out the best way to do that. So yeah, if you want to send me a proposal, that's totally fine. We're pretty informal on that. In most cases, we write up the plan for people ourselves because it can be, especially to somebody who's brand new to this, it can be a bit daunting to try to write their own scientific sampling plan. If you're experienced, yeah, by all means, send me a proposal and then we'll get that set up. Does anybody else have any other questions?
I had a question from a master naturalist earlier about, and there was a small pond nearby, and asking what are the, the cutoffs, because I know we're looking for potential water bodies or that potentially might be listed or delisted, so that would be the priority. But is there like a size of a of a pond or a lake that you would
I think
prefer?
I would say no. So I brought this to my bosses on several occasions, like, hey, are you guys going to howl if somebody samples this, whatever this little thing might be? And I've never gotten a no. The other thing is, I guess I would say we probably want to stick to waters of the state or public access waters. Like the purpose of this isn't really to like sample your stock ponds so much. It's more to get data on public water bodies. So I'd say that would be the main cutoff, was that the water body has public access of some kind, even if it's a very small stream or lake, as long as there's public access, even if it's just a bridge road crossing. That's good enough. As long as it has water in it, that's important too.
Just for the understanding, what is the status of the meandered waters, where it used to be all water was public land and now it wasn't, and then it was? I mean, what's the status of that?
Oh, I wish I could explain that really well to you. I haven't looked into it in quite a while, so I fear that I may not say something accurate as well. The one thing I can say is that Game Fish and Parks has an online map that shows public access waters, and it also shows public access points. I think it's called the fishing public access map or something like that. If you go
I'll
to
put it in the chat.
Yeah, good idea. Thank you. I use that one a lot myself to make sure if I'm okay to go sample somewhere, because, I don't want to trespass on somebody's land on accident while I'm going to collect a water sample. And that's the thing that we should all be aware of is whether you're collecting a water sample or not, it's still trespassing. So yeah, I refer to that map. I also use it to find those public access points for like shoreline sampling and things like that. It's more of an issue with lakes for the meandered waters rule. With streams, at any road crossing where there's a public bridge or culvert, the right of way is public land. The landowners may disagree with you on that, but frankly, they're wrong. If you're in the right of way, you're okay to be there. If you cross over a fence, though, then you're trespassing. So at least, if you stay under the bridge, sometimes they put the fence right up the side of the bridge. You can go over that fence, but don't go out in the field. That's going to be a no-no. I don't know. That's probably the best that I could answer that question without consulting GF&P and hearing what they have to say about it.
Oh, that makes sense. And is the public land still below the traditional high water mark, or is it only in the water's edge?
So I believe it's still the high water mark, but that only applies to meandered waters. So you would have to know if the water body, the river or stream you're talking about, meandered navigable waters. So like the Missouri and the James River and, and the Big Sioux are, I believe, navigable waters. But a lot of smaller streams are not. So you'd want to be real careful on that too. And again, I don't know the details on that necessarily. Our staff, we always just stay below the high water mark, which is kind of the top of the bank. So like if you're on the Big Sioux or something and you have private land abutting the stream. But yeah, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to dig into those and try to help you find more specific answers if you're not able to find them on your own. Because yeah, we don't want anyone to get in trouble out there just trying to do a good thing. And some landowners are not friendly. So some are very great. You just don't know what you're going to get on any given day. So yeah, but if you, Harold had a question. Are you interested in smaller streams? Yeah, we are. As long as it flows. And that's kind of one of our standards for whether or not we sample a stream. If it's not flowing, we don't want to collect a sample because that data is going to be biased, or the result's going to be biased, because it isn't representative of the stream. It's representative of stagnant water sitting over the stream bed. It's going to change the concentrations of various pollutants in that water sample. So as long as it's flowing, yeah, we're okay with it. If it's a drainage that flows once every 10 years, yeah, that's probably not a candidate for sampling. But if it typically has water in it, yeah, we'd be up for sampling that. We have groups that sample some pretty small tributary type streams, and that's totally okay. Those streams count too. Because one thing that we didn't mention is in the integrated report, we don't report and assess every single stream in the state. If a stream doesn't have data and has never been reported on, it won't be in there. But if you collect enough data to meet those minimum data requirements, then the state will have to report on it in the integrated report and make an assessment under the Clean Water Act. So that in a sense, it's a way that we can almost like force our stream to be noticed, or our lake, or whatever it might be. So I do encourage people to sample waters that haven't been sampled before for that reason. And we set up your sampling plans so that we meet those minimum data requirements, and then we can do that assessment and decide whether or not that water body is impaired. So you can bring new water bodies to light if through your efforts. And we've had several groups do that, and it's resulted in those water bodies being reported on in the integrated report. And we figured out if they're impaired or not. Dan Johnson has a question. What happens if a stream is impaired? Not a lot in most cases. It just indicates to the public and everybody else that it has a problem with pollution. But one really good thing that it does is the state in our watershed protection program is then able to direct federal funds that we get from the EPA towards improving that stream. If it's not impaired, we can't spend our money on it. But if it is impaired, we can. And so we get a couple million from EPA every year that we put towards water quality monitoring and improvement, like restoration type projects. So we would have to have, and we do have active like restoration projects throughout the state, but they're not everywhere. So we'd have to have a project to work on that water body. But if it's impaired, we can put money towards it. So we can do things to say fence off the stream and keep cattle out if we have landowners willing to work with us, and other things like that. Chuck Berry had a question. How many sample times would you like to see on the lake? Maybe spring and late summer. We shoot for 3, but 2 would be okay. How I typically set it up is I do a June, July, August sample for the mid-lake samples, and that really covers the whole growing season. It doesn't really matter what part of the month you collect that sample in, but 3 gives us, we can do a little bit more with the data with 3 samples than we can with 2. Because for some of our standards, we average those sample results, and averaging 2 numbers, 3 isn't a lot better, but at least it's better. So yeah, we typically shoot for 3. For your lake shoreline samples, say E. coli, we only sample those May through September. So if you want to do those monthly, that would be what, 5? Because the E. coli standard only applies during the recreation season, which is May 1st to September 30th. And then for microcystin, we're typically looking at kind of your June, July, August, September to sample those, kind of at the peak growing season when we're going to have algae present. But yeah, typically 3 for a mid-lake sample. If you can only do 2, we would allow it. But one doesn't really get us anywhere because it doesn't meet those minimum data requirements. Guy Larson asked, do you want us to stop composite sampling in the Yankton area? That is up to you guys. If you guys want to finish out last year of your sampling plan doing composite sampling, you can totally do that. If you would prefer to switch over to grab sampling right now, I'll leave that up to you guys. Either way is fine. Just let me know what you're going to do so I can indicate it on your data sheets and your labels. We'll make you new labels that are marked as a grab sample rather than a composite if that's what you want to do. Either way is fine with me. Great questions.
So we'll get the I'll get the slides from Jesse and Jordan and we'll send them out. Feel free to contact them before the training if you would like, if you're sure this is what you want to do. Otherwise, you can come to the training and figure it out and then follow up with the sampling plan. I wanted to just give you a few more highlights of what's happening in the volunteer monitoring in the, citizen science aquatic monitoring world. As Jesse and Jordan started out saying, you're basically a field technician. You're doing it, the protocols, the same way that the field techs are doing it, the summer seasonals, and Jesse and Jordan themselves are doing it. So, and there's a fair level of rigor involved. And if you're thinking, that might not be for me, or you're concerned about managing the bottles, or you're just, you just know you can't commit the time to it, we do have other options for you to dip a toe in the water, pardon the pun, not really. I just wanted to show you a few opportunities that we have for people who might be interested. Now, everybody who participates in any of the water quality monitoring will receive a pin. We don't know what it will look like. And for the South Dakota Master Naturalists, the executive committee has agreed that this is a pin you could wear on your lanyard. So in addition to all the other pins you're going to get. So if you participate in the Macroinvertebrates, the volunteer water quality, or one of these other projects I'm about to show you, you get the pin. So the first project I'm showing you is the South Dakota Aquatic Macroinvertebrate Survey. And you're like, well, didn't Jesse talk about that? This is different. This is simply a survey of macroinvertebrates that we are collecting, or actually just kind of taking pictures of and uploading those pictures to iNaturalist. It's the idea, and I have looked elsewhere in the US for somebody doing this so I could borrow their protocols and things. Nobody's doing it as far as I can tell. So this is a pilot year. I don't know if I'm crazy or just brilliant. I guess we'll find out at the end of the summer. So I'm looking for people who are willing to pilot this. And the idea is not to make a water quality determination, because we have a volunteer monitoring macroinvertebrate program already that will end up in a water quality determination. This is just what's living in our water. And with the idea being that we see caddisflies and mayflies, and then 5 years later, we realize that we're now seeing midges. And so it's just a very kind of presence absence kind of thing. We're hoping that people will get involved and excited and, want to take the next step to doing the volunteer version. The other one, Yeah, the Ikes, and the reason I looked at the Ikes and the reason I did not go with that one is because it does have a water quality determination. And you can't just upload the pictures. It brings you to good quality water, bad quality water. And I know Jesse and Jordan will not think kindly of me if somebody calls and says, my bugs say my stream is bad. And it's like, so, but yes, thank you for pointing that out. And I plan on using some of the Ike's resources for this project as well. Another project is the land cover globe observer, and that's strictly this globe is a NASA project program, and you download an app and you take pictures north, south, east, west, up and down. And of course, we ask you to be thoughtful about where you're taking them. But we started it out last year for hydrology and riparian. So this is one that you can do year round. So we can get pictures of what's happening on a lake or stream in the winter, spring, summer, and fall. But I was talking with Jesse, and I think Jordan, you were there too. And it's really could be useful for understanding ephemeral streams. So if you're a hiker and sometimes there's water in a stream you hike over and sometimes there's not, it would be useful to get a sense of when is there water in that stream? So, and the last one that we piloted this one last year, and we're still looking at this one, is about water transparency. And it's a version of the Secchi disc, and I will show you a super short video I made about how that works.
Measuring the clarity or transparency of water in a lake, river, or stream is a good way to learn about that water body, as well as learn about its watershed or the land surrounding it. One simple but effective way to measure water transparency is with a T-tube. The T-tube is 120 centimeters high with a metric tape measure permanently attached to the side. The bottom of the T-tube has a black and white quadrant pattern called a Secchi pattern. A small shunt with a clip is also at the bottom. To use the T-tube, first you scoop up a sample of water. You fill the tube with your sample. When the tube is filled, you look down the tube from the top. If your water is clear or transparent, you'll be able to see the Secchi pattern at the bottom. If you cannot see the Secchi pattern, you open the shunt and allow the water to drain, watching it from above. When you can make out the pattern, you close the shunt. Your water transparency reading is the level of the water when the Secchi pattern appears.
So if that looks like something you would like to do, that would be a couple of times a year, definitely spring and fall. Winter might be interesting too. Let me know and we can hook you up with a T-tube. And you can just report the data back to me through an email. Or if you're really motivated, we can get you the Globe app and get you an account and get you all set up that way.
So Anne, is that, I know you sent me one, I already have one.
Mm-hmm.
Is that lakes and streams or?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep, absolutely. So, all right. Well, we're at the bottom of the hour. And so I think we will wrap up now. If you have any questions for Jesse, Jordan, or myself, please feel free to reach out. We'll send out the emails, links to the presentations that we put out, and the aquatic macroinvertebrate, the land cover observer, and the T-tube work. So have a good evening, and thank you all for coming. And Master Naturalists, don't forget to record this as volunteer hours. Because if you go on to train, this is part, if you go on to volunteer, this is part of your training. So if you don't think you're going to go on to volunteer, you're just here to learn, you can count them as advanced education. So that makes sense to the Master Naturalist, probably not to everybody else, but so. All right. I'm going to stop recording and